He was 18 years old when his stepmother told him he had inherited a worthless machine shop. What he found inside wasn't just about scrap metal and old tools. It was about a hidden past that would give him a future he never thought he deserved. If you've ever felt like you've been thrown away, or that your story was over before it even began, then stick around and hit that subscribe button, because this is for you. The day I turned 18 was the day I became homeless. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-style explosion. It was quiet. It was cold. It was the sterile silence of a house that had never felt like a home. My stepmother, Carol, was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs when I came down for breakfast, which was a clear sign something was wrong. She never waited for me. For the last 6 years, since my dad died and left me in her care, our relationship had been a series of carefully avoided collisions in hallways and polite, empty questions over dinner. She held a cardboard box in her hands. It wasn't wrapped. It was just a plain, brown box, sealed with a single piece of packing tape. "Happy birthday, Leo," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. It was the same voice she used to talk to telemarketers. I just stood there on the third-to-last step, my hand on the banister my father had sanded and stained himself 2 decades ago. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Your father's will stipulated that you were my legal and financial responsibility until you reached the age of majority," she continued, as if reading from a script. "As of today, that obligation is fulfilled. I've sold the house. The new owners take possession in a week. I'm moving to Florida." Florida. It sounded like another planet. She held the box out to me. I didn't move to take it. My feet felt like they were nailed to the stairs. "This is yours," she said, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. "It's from your grandfather, your mother's father." It was part of his estate. It legally passed to your mother and then to you. I've been holding it. I finally walked down the last few steps and took the box. It was heavier than it looked. It felt cold. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a machine shop," she said, turning away and walking toward the kitchen, "in some godforsaken town called Oakhaven. The deed is in there, along with the key. From what the lawyers said years ago, it's worthless. A derelict building on a forgotten patch of dirt. You can probably sell it for scrap, get a few $100s. Enough for a bus ticket somewhere." She paused at the kitchen door and looked back at me, her face a mask of tired resentment. "I've packed your things. They're in the garage. A taxi will be here in an hour to take you to the bus station. I've left you $500 on the counter. Consider it a final severance." And that was it. No hug, no good luck. Just a transaction, an obligation met. A burden lifted. I stood alone in the foyer, the house suddenly feeling vast and empty around me. The smell of lemon cleaner couldn't hide the scent of decay, the slow 6-year rot of a family. I looked down at the box. My grandfather. I barely remembered him. He died when I was 10, a year before my mom got sick. He was a quiet, calloused man who smelled of grease and metal, a ghost in the corners of my earliest memories. My mom had loved him fiercely, but after she married my dad, they had drifted apart. A fight about my father's business, my mom had once said vaguely. Something they never recovered from. I ran my thumb over the taped seam of the box. A worthless machine shop. It sounded like a punchline, a cruel joke at the end of a long, sad story. But it was also the only thing I had. An hour later, I was sitting in the back of a yellow taxi, my entire life condensed into 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw Carol watching from the window, her silhouette a dark shape against the bright morning light. She didn't wave. I didn't look back. The bus station was a symphony of diesel fumes and quiet desperation. I bought a ticket to a place called Oakhaven, a name that meant nothing to me. The clerk had to search for it in the system. "One way?" she asked, her eyes tired. "Yeah," I said. "One way." I found a hard plastic seat and waited. The $500 Carol had given me felt like a hot coal in my pocket. It was both an insult and a lifeline. I spent the first few hours of the bus ride in a state of suspended animation, a thick fog of shock and numbness settling over me. The world outside the grimy window was a blur of green and gray. Trees, fields, strip malls, all blending into one meaningless landscape. I was a ghost haunting the aisle seat of a Greyhound bus, invisible to the sleeping woman next to me, and the young mother trying to quiet her baby a few rows ahead. My mind kept replaying the scene with Carol, the flat tone of her voice, the finality in her eyes. It shouldn't have been a surprise. I was a living, breathing reminder of a life she wanted to forget. A loose end from her brief, unhappy marriage to my dad. After he was gone, she'd tried, I guess. For a few months, there were awkward attempts at conversation, burnt dinners she apologized for. But the grief that hollowed me out seemed to harden her. My sadness was an accusation, and she grew to resent it. We became polite strangers living in the same house, our orbits carefully managed to avoid contact. Now, her obligation was done. The fog in my head slowly began to burn away, replaced by the cold, sharp sting of reality. I was 18. I had 2 bags of clothes, a cardboard box, and a one-way ticket to nowhere. The anger came first, a hot, useless surge. Anger at Carol for her cruelty. Anger at my dad for dying, for leaving me with her. Anger at my mom for getting sick, for leaving me altogether. The anger churned in my stomach, making me feel sick, but it was like punching water. It had no target, no substance. It just left me exhausted. Then came the fear. It wasn't a loud, screaming panic. It was a quiet, creeping cold that started in my feet and worked its way up my spine. It was the fear of the unknown, of total, absolute aloneness. Who would I call if I got into trouble? Who would even know if I just disappeared? There was no one. The thought was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window and closed my eyes. I thought about my mother. I summoned her face, her smile, the way her eyes would crinkle at the corners. I remembered her telling me stories about her father, my grandfather. She'd called him the magician. She said he could fix anything. Broken toys, sputtering car engines, a leaky faucet. He understood how things worked, the secret language of gears and wires. "He's a man of quiet integrity, Leo," she'd told me once, her voice soft. "He doesn't say much, but what he builds, it lasts." Integrity. The word felt ancient and important. I pulled the box onto my lap. It was just an ordinary box, but it felt like a relic. I slit the tape with my house key, a key that no longer opened any door for me, and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in yellowed newspaper, was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. It was ornate, with a complex, toothed bit. Beside it was a thick manila envelope, brittle with age. I pulled out the envelope. My name, Leo Vance, was written on the front in a strong, slanted script. It was my grandfather's handwriting. I recognized it from the one birthday card I still had from him, tucked away in a book. I opened the unsealed flap and slid out a folded document. It was a deed. The legal, formal language was dense, but the words jumped out at me. "Do hereby grant and convey to Leo Vance the property located at 141 River Street, Oakhaven." There was a map, a small, hand-drawn diagram of the town, with a red X marking the spot. It looked small, isolated, near a river I'd never heard of. a worthless machine shop. I folded the deed and put it back in the envelope. The key felt heavy in my palm. It was real. This place was real. It was mine. The thought didn't bring comfort. It brought a new kind of dread. What was I going to do with a machine shop? I didn't know the first thing about tools or engines. I was a kid who was good at English and history, not shop class. It felt like my grandfather had handed me a book written in a language I couldn't read. The bus rumbled on, carrying me deeper into a future that felt like a void. The sun began to set, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. I watched the light fade, feeling a profound sense of dislocation, as if I had been untethered from the world. I was just a boy in a box, hurtling through the dark. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, the bus driver was calling out, "Oak Haven, last stop." I jolted awake. The bus was mostly empty. Outside the window, darkness. A single streetlight illuminated a small, sad-looking depot. I grabbed my bags and the box and stumbled out into the cold night air. The air in Oak Haven was different. It was crisp and clean, smelling of damp earth, pine trees, and something faintly metallic, like rain on old iron. The bus station was little more than a one-room building with a flickering fluorescent light. A sign on the door said it closed at 11 p.m. It was 10:55. I was the only one who had gotten off. The bus pulled away with a hiss of its air brakes, its red taillights shrinking into the darkness, leaving me utterly alone. The silence that descended was absolute. No traffic, no sirens, no distant hum of a city. Just the sound of my own breathing and the chirping of crickets. I looked at the hand-drawn map again, under the weak streetlight. River Street wasn't far. According to the little diagram, it was a 10-minute walk. I hoisted the duffel bags over my shoulders, tucked the box under one arm, and started walking. The town was asleep. The shops on the main street were dark, their windows like vacant eyes. There was a diner with a faded sign, a hardware store, a post office. It looked like a town that time had forgotten to update. The buildings were old, mostly brick, with a proud but weary look to them. It felt like walking onto a movie set after the crew had gone home. I turned onto River Street. The name was literal. A wide, dark river flowed slowly on my left, the water black as ink. On my right was a row of warehouses and industrial-looking buildings, all of them dark and silent. They looked like sleeping metal giants. The air grew colder near the water. A thin mist was rising from the surface, coiling around the wooden pilings of an old dock. I checked the numbers on the buildings. 135, 137, 139, and then 141. I stopped. It was exactly as Carol had described it. And it was worse. The building was a long, low structure of corrugated metal, rusted in jagged patches like an old wound. The roof sagged in the middle, looking like one heavy snowfall would bring the whole thing down. The windows were opaque with years of grime, and one was boarded up with weathered plywood. A large, sliding garage door was padlocked, the metal groaning under the weight of its own rust. To the left was a smaller, single door, the one that presumably matched the key in my pocket. Vance and Son Machining was painted above the main door in faded white letters, the Son almost completely weathered away. Vance and Son. My grandfather and his father before him. My heart gave a strange, painful lurch. This wasn't just a building. It was a piece of my history, a history I knew nothing about. I walked up the 3 cracked concrete steps to the side door. The air was thick with the smell of decay and stagnant water from the nearby river. I put my bags down. My hand was shaking as I inserted the iron key into the lock. It felt like I was waking something that had been sleeping for a very long time. The lock was stiff. I had to put my shoulder into it, turning the key with both hands. For a moment, I thought it was rusted shut. Then, with a loud, grating crack, the tumblers gave way. The sound echoed in the silent street. I pushed the door open. It scraped against the concrete floor. A low, mournful groan. A wave of air washed over me from inside. It was an ancient smell. Cold oil, metal dust, and the dry, papery scent of time itself. I stood on the threshold, peering into the absolute blackness within. This was it, my inheritance. A dark, empty, worthless building at the edge of a forgotten town. For a second, all I wanted to do was turn around, walk back to the bus station, and wait for the first bus out in the morning. Go anywhere. But where? The $500 wouldn't last forever. And a deeper, quieter part of me, the part that still held a memory of my mother's voice, knew that this was it. This was the only door left open to me. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm the frantic beating of my heart, I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with a heavy, final-sounding thud, plunging me into complete darkness. My hand fumbled along the wall, searching for a light switch. My fingers brushed against cobwebs, flaking paint, and then, finally, a cold, smooth toggle switch. I flipped it. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. The power was off. Of course it was. I pulled out my phone, its screen a blinding beacon in the oppressive dark. I turned on the flashlight, the narrow beam cutting a path through the gloom. The light played over a vast, cavernous space. It was filled with monstrous shapes, silent metal beasts sleeping under thick blankets of dust. Lathes, drill presses, milling machines. I didn't know their names, but I could feel their immense, dormant power. They were arranged in neat rows, a silent army waiting for orders that had stopped coming long ago. Cobwebs stretched from machine to machine like ghostly bunting. The concrete floor was stained with ancient spills of oil and littered with metal shavings that crunched under my feet like broken glass. A fine layer of dust covered everything, a gray snow that had been falling for years. It was a tomb, a monument to forgotten work. I swept the light around the room. In the back corner, a small, glass-paned door was set into a cinder-block wall. An office. I made my way toward it, my footsteps the only sound in the cavernous silence. The duffel bags felt impossibly heavy. The office door was locked, but it was a simple, modern lock, not the ancient iron beast on the main door. I remembered the box. I had left it outside. I went back, propped the heavy main door open with a stray brick, and retrieved it. Rummaging inside, my fingers found a small ring of keys. The second one I tried clicked open the office lock. The office was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. It contained a single metal desk, a worn-out swivel chair with cracked vinyl, and a row of green filing cabinets. Unlike the main shop floor, the office was relatively clean. There was dust, yes, but it was a thin layer, not the thick shroud that covered everything else. It felt like someone had been here more recently. My phone's beam fell on the desk. On its clear surface sat a single object, a gray metal lockbox, the kind you might keep petty cash in. It wasn't dusty at all. It looked like it had been placed there yesterday. My heart started to pound. This was deliberate. This was a message. The box wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money. There was only a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name, Leo Vance, was written on it in that same, familiar, strong script. I sat down in the creaking swivel chair, the only sounds the pounding in my ears and the distant, gentle lapping of the river. The air in the tiny office was still and close. I carefully lifted the envelope out of the box. It was heavy, thick with pages. My hands were trembling so much I could barely tear the flap. I unfolded the letter. It was several pages long, filled with that same slanted, confident handwriting. I angled my phone to illuminate the first page. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am long gone, and you have finally come home. I am sorry that we did not have more time together. I am sorry for the distance that grew between us. Life has a way of building walls where there should be bridges, and pride is a poor stonemason. I hope one day you can forgive an old man's foolishness. I had to stop and take a breath. The words felt incredibly close, as if you were whispering them in the dark room with me. My throat felt tight. I imagine you have been told that this place is worthless, a pile of rust. I imagine you are scared and alone and wondering what cruel joke this is. It is no joke, son. This place, this building, these old machines, they are a fortress, and what they are guarding is your future. Your mother, my beautiful, stubborn daughter, she made me promise to look out for you if anything ever happened to her.
I am a man who keeps his promises, even from beyond the grave. She worried you had too much of her heart and not enough of my hard-headedness. She wanted you to have a place that was yours, a foundation, something no one could ever take from you. I read that line again. Something no one could ever take from you. After the last 6 years, after this very day, those words landed like an anchor in the storm of my confusion. I continued reading, my phone's light shaking slightly. I know you don't know the first thing about machining, and that's all right. The value of this place isn't in the scrap iron. Not anymore. I've left you something else. A legacy. But you will have to work for it. You will have to prove you are worthy of it. I need to know you have the grit, the character, to see it through. Your real inheritance is not something I can just give you. It is something you must choose to claim. Your first test is a simple one. In the main shop, there is a large South Bend lathe by the north wall, the one under the boarded-up window. It was the first machine I ever bought. Your mother used to play on it when she was a little girl, pretending it was a spaceship. At the base of the machine, on the side facing the wall, there is a small, loose maintenance panel. Behind it, you will find the next step. If you choose to walk away, I understand. Sell the shop, take the money, and find your own way. There is no shame in that. But if you have any of your mother's fire in you, if you have any of my stubborn steel, you will look behind that panel. The choice, as it always is yours. With all my love, your grandfather, Thomas Vance. I finished the letter and let the pages fall onto the desk. The silence of the shop pressed in on me. A choice. He had given me a choice. For 6 years, I'd had no choices. I had been a passenger in my own life, shuttled from one stage to the next by rules and obligations that had nothing to do with me. Now, for the first time, I was at a crossroads that was entirely my own. My mind was a whirlwind. Carol's voice echoed in my head. Sell it for scrap, get a few $100s. It was the easy path, the sensible one. I could be on a bus in the morning, gone. I could take the $500, add a few hundred more from the scrapyard, and start over somewhere new, somewhere warm. Florida, maybe. A place with no memories, no ghosts. I could leave the rust and the dust and the promises of a dead man behind. The thought was tempting. It was a siren song of simplicity, of freedom from this heavy, complicated inheritance. What did I owe this place? What did I owe a man I barely knew? I stood up and walked out of the office, back into the vast, dark space of the shop. My phone's light was starting to dim, the battery draining. I swept the beam across the silent machines, until it landed on the north wall, under the boarded-up window. There it was, a large, green, formidable-looking lathe. It was even bigger up close, a complex assembly of gears, levers, and a heavy, solid bed. It looked less like a tool and more like a piece of industrial sculpture. I ran my hand along its cold, dusty surface. A spaceship. I could almost picture a little girl, my mother, playing here, her imagination transforming this greasy machine into a vessel for adventure. I felt a sudden sharp pang of grief, so intense it almost buckled my knees. I cried. I didn't even realize it at first. It wasn't loud sobbing, just a silent, hot stream of tears tracking paths through the grime on my face. I cried for my mother, who I missed with an ache that never faded. I cried for the grandfather I never got to know. I cried for the father who was gone too soon. And finally, I cried for myself.
For the lost, scared 18-year-old boy standing in the dark in a dead man's workshop with the weight of his entire life in 2 duffel bags. For a long moment, I let the despair wash over me. It was too much. The promise, the test, the legacy. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't my mother. I wasn't my grandfather. I was just a kid. I was just tired. The easy path called to me again. Just walk away, Leo. Just let it all go. And you know, if you've made it this far in the story, maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've stood at a crossroads where one path was easy and brightly lit, and the other was dark, difficult, and terrifying. Maybe you've felt that temptation to just give up, to take the path of least resistance. If you have, I want you to drop a comment below and just write, "I've been there," because you're not alone. We've all faced that choice. The real question is what you do next.
I stood there for what felt like an hour, phone light dying, darkness gathering at the edges of the beam. I thought about my mom's smile. I thought about her voice saying, "He's a man of quiet integrity." Integrity. The word echoed in the silence. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the shop. It was about the choice. My grandfather hadn't left me a building. He had left me a test of character. He was asking me, from across the veil of death, who I was going to be. Was I going to be the boy who ran, or the man who stayed? My tears slowed. My breathing steadied. A new feeling began to replace the despair, a tiny, fragile spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. I wiped my face with the dusty sleeve of my jacket. I wasn't going to run. I didn't know if I had my mother's fire or my grandfather's steel, but I was going to find out. I knelt down beside the massive lathe. The air was cold on the concrete floor. I ran my hands along the base of the machine, feeling for the panel he had described. My fingers, numb with cold, brushed against a small, rectangular plate of metal, almost invisible under the layers of grime. It was held in place by 2 simple flathead screws. They were old and rusted. I didn't have a screwdriver. For a moment, I felt a surge of frustration. It was a stupid, simple obstacle, but it felt like the whole universe was conspiring to keep me from moving forward. Then my fingers brushed against the iron key in my pocket. It was thick, solid. The end of it was flat. I pulled it out. It wasn't a screwdriver, but it might work. I wedged the tip of the key into the slot of the first screw. I pushed and twisted. The rust fought back. My knuckles scraped against the machine's cast-iron body. The key slipped, gouging my palm. I swore under my breath, a sharp, angry sound in the quiet shop. I tried again, putting all my weight into it, my jaw clenched. With a screech of protesting metal, the screw turned. Just a quarter of an inch, but it turned. A jolt of triumph shot through me. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I worked on that first screw for 10 minutes, my breath fogging in the cold air, my muscles straining. Finally, it came loose. The second screw was just as stubborn, but I was relentless now. The initial despair had been burned away by the simple, physical act of trying. I was no longer thinking about Carol or the money or how scared I was. I was focused on one thing, getting that screw to turn. When the second screw finally came free, I felt a wave of relief so profound it left me dizzy. I pried the small metal panel off. It came away with a sucking sound, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity in the base of the machine. I shone my failing phone light inside. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a stash of cash or a hidden treasure map. It was a book, a thick, leather-bound ledger, its cover worn smooth with use. Beside it lay another envelope, much thicker than the first, sealed with a wax stamp bearing the initial V. I reached into the cavity, my heart hammering against my ribs. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth leather of the ledger. I pulled it out. It was heavy, substantial. I opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's same neat, slanted script. But this wasn't a letter. It was a journal and a workbook. There were dates, notes, calculations, and sketches. Incredibly detailed, precise drawings of gears, engine components, and complex mechanical assemblies. I flipped through the pages. It was a record of his work, his ideas, his inventions. This wasn't just a ledger. It was the mind of a master craftsman, laid bare on paper. Then I picked up the thick envelope. It was addressed to a Mr. Alistair Finch, Esquire. Below the name was a phone number. I broke the wax seal and opened it.
Inside were not letters, but a sheaf of official-looking documents. Patents. Dozens of them. Each one for a unique metallurgical process or a specialized machine tool design. They were filled with technical jargon I didn't understand, but I understood the official stamps, the signatures, the sheer weight of the paper. This was serious. At the very back of the stack was a folder of correspondence. Letters between Vance and Sun Machining and a company called AeroCorp Dynamics. The early letters were professional, discussing a potential partnership. AeroCorp was interested in one of my grandfather's patented alloys. Then the tone shifted. The letters from AeroCorp became more demanding, more aggressive. The last letter was from my grandfather to AeroCorp. It was a carbon copy, the typewritten letters faint. It was a furious, eloquent refusal to sell his patents, accusing them of trying to bully him into surrendering his life's work.
He had underlined a final sentence. My integrity is not for sale. My phone buzzed, a low battery warning flashing on the screen before it went completely dark, plunging me back into absolute blackness. I sat there on the cold concrete floor, the weight of the ledger in my lap, the patents in my hand. My grandfather hadn't been a simple mechanic. He was an inventor, a brilliant one. And he had been fighting a war to protect his work. A war against a giant corporation. The worthless machine shop wasn't worthless at all. It was the command center of a one-man resistance. It was the vault that held his legacy. And now it was mine. I didn't know what to do. I was sitting in the dark, holding evidence of a corporate battle I couldn't possibly comprehend. The name AeroCorp Dynamics sounded powerful, expensive. What could I, an 18-year-old with nothing, do against a company like that? The fear came back, cold and sharp. This was bigger than I could handle. The name on the envelope came back to me. Mr. Alistair Finch, Esquire, a lawyer. My grandfather had left me a weapon, but he had also left me an ally. I had to make a call. I spent the rest of the night in the office, huddled in the broken chair for warmth. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the story I had uncovered. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faded letters of Vance and Son above the door. It felt less like a name and more like a title, a responsibility that had been passed down to me. As soon as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the grimy office window, I was on my feet. I found a phone book, a dusty, ancient thing, in one of the filing cabinets. I looked up the power company. I used the last of my phone's battery after plugging it into an outlet in the vain hope some residual charge might exist to make the call. It died halfway through, but I got the information I needed. It would cost $200 to reconnect the power, a deposit against future use. That was almost half of my entire net worth. It was a gamble. But I had to see. I had to know what else was hidden in this place. I walked into town as the sun was rising. Oak Haven looked different in the morning light. It was still quiet and old, but it wasn't sad. It was peaceful. Smoke curled from the chimney of the diner. A man in overalls was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store. He nodded at me as I passed. It was a small gesture, but it felt like an acknowledgement. Like I wasn't a ghost after all. I paid the bill at a small municipal office, the woman behind the counter giving me a curious but not unfriendly look. Then I went to the diner. The smell of coffee and bacon was the most welcoming thing I had experienced in years. I ordered a huge breakfast and ate like I hadn't seen food in a week. As I sat there, nursing a cup of coffee, I pulled out the patents and the ledger.
I couldn't understand the technical details, but I could understand the care, the precision of the drawings. This was the work of a man who loved what he did. This was his art. After breakfast, I found a payphone, a relic I was surprised still existed, and dialed the number for Mr. Alistair Finch. I was terrified. My hands were sweating as I held the receiver. It rang 3 times, and then a calm, steady voice answered. Finch. Hello, I stammered. My name is Leo Vance. I was given your name by my grandfather, Thomas Vance. There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was a long silence, filled with unspoken history. I thought he might have hung up. Then the voice came back, softer this time. Thomas's grandson. I've been waiting for your call for a long time, son. Where are you? I'm in Oakhaven, I said. I'm at the shop. Good, Mr. Finch said. Don't leave. Don't talk to anyone. And don't, under any circumstances, agree to sell that property. Do you understand me, Leo?
I think so, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I found the patents and the letters from AeroCorp. I heard him take a deep breath. Then you know. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Leo. A genius in his field. AeroCorp tried to buy his alloy patents 10 years ago. When he refused, they stole them. They reverse-engineered his work and filed their own patents, claiming the innovation was theirs. They built a $1 billion aerospace division on the back of your grandfather's genius. The story tumbled out of him, calm, factual, but with an undercurrent of cold fury. My grandfather had tried to fight them. He'd hired Mr. Finch. They'd prepared a lawsuit. But AeroCorp had deeper pockets. They buried him in legal motions, bled him dry. He couldn't afford to continue the fight in court, so he retreated. He came back here, to Oakhaven, to the shop his father had started. He fortified it. He hid everything, his original research, his lab notes, his signed and dated proofs of invention, the ledger. The shop wasn't just a shop, it was an evidence locker. AeroCorp knows the evidence is there, Mr. Finch explained. They can't risk it ever seeing the light of day. For the last few years, they've been trying to buy the whole block, the whole waterfront, under the guise of a shell corporation called Riverfront Development. They want to level the entire area, bulldoze your grandfather's shop, and bury his legacy under a pile of luxury condos. Your stepmother, I'm sorry to say, was contacted by them. They offered her a paltry sum for the property, and she was all too eager to sign it over to you so you could sell it. The pieces clicked into place. Carol's dismissal, her insistence that it was worthless. She hadn't been lying, she had just been ignorant. Or maybe she just didn't care. To her, it was worthless, a problem to be disposed of. What do we do? I asked.
The "we" slipped out, a hopeful, desperate plea.
Now we fight back, Mr. Finch said, his voice firm. Your grandfather's case was dismissed without prejudice, meaning it can be refiled. With you as the heir to his estate, you have standing. The evidence in that shop is the key. But they will come for you, Leo. They'll try to intimidate you. They'll make you offers. They will try to crush you, just like they tried to crush him. I looked out the phone booth at the quiet main street of Oakhaven. It seemed impossible that this sleepy little town was the battlefield for a multi-billion-dollar corporate war. I'm not I'm not a fighter, I said, the old doubt creeping back in. Your grandfather said the same thing, Mr. Finch replied gently. He said he was just a man who liked to build things. But he fought, Leo. He fought until he had nothing left. He didn't lose. He just ran out of time. He left this fight to you. Not as a burden, but as an opportunity.
The patents, if we can prove provenance, are worth a fortune, more money than you can imagine. But your grandfather didn't care about the money. He cared about the principle. He cared about the truth. The truth, that word again. It felt heavier than all the machines in the shop combined. I'll be there in 2 days, Mr. Finch concluded. I have to clear my calendar. Just stay put, stay safe. And Leo, your grandfather would be proud of you. You made it this far. You passed the test. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. I walked back to the shop, the world feeling both terrifyingly dangerous and thrillingly alive. When I got there, I flicked the light switch by the door. This time, with a hum and a flicker, the long fluorescent tubes on the ceiling blinked to life, one by one, illuminating the vast space. It wasn't a tomb anymore. It was an armory. The dust was still there, the rust, the grime. But now I saw it differently. I saw the lathe where my mother had played. I saw the workbench where my grandfather had sketched out his genius. I saw the silent, powerful machines not as scrap, but as sleeping soldiers in an army he had left for me. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of activity. I started by cleaning. It was a monumental task, but I needed to do something physical, something real. I found a broom and swept away years of dust and metal shavings. I found a bucket and rags and began the slow, arduous process of wiping down the machines. As I cleaned, I explored. I opened every drawer, every cabinet. I found old blueprints, half-finished projects, boxes of specialized tools whose purpose I could only guess at. I found a small cot in a back storage room, with a thin mattress and a single blanket. My grandfather must have slept here, working late into the night, guarding his secrets. This place wasn't just his workshop, it was his sanctuary. I felt his presence everywhere. In the worn handle of a hammer, in the faint scent of pipe tobacco in the office, in the pages of his ledger, which I read every night. His notes were not just technical, they were philosophical. He wrote about the beauty of a perfectly machined gear, the honesty of steel, the satisfaction of creating something that worked, something that was true. He was a poet whose medium was metal. I began to understand him. He wasn't a cold, distant man. He was a focused, passionate creator who had been wounded by the world and had retreated into the one place where he was in control, where the rules were clear and integrity mattered. The day Mr. Finch was due to arrive, a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled up in front of the shop. It wasn't the old, sensible sedan I had pictured for a small-town lawyer. A man in a sharp suit got out. He was young, polished, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Leo Vance?" he asked, approaching me where I stood by the open door. "My name is Mr. Davies. I'm an attorney representing Riverfront Development." My heart hammered in my chest. So it begins. "I'm not interested," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. He kept smiling. "Oh, I think you will be. We understand you've inherited this property." He gestured at the shop with a dismissive wave. "It's an eyesore, frankly, and a safety hazard. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer to take it off your hands. $100,000. Cash." $100,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of. It was a new life. It was everything I thought I wanted. I could take that money and disappear. Mr. Finch would understand. My grandfather would understand. But then I looked past the lawyer, into the shop. I saw the lathe, now clean and gleaming under the lights. I thought of the ledger, of the words,
My integrity is not for sale. I thought of my mother's voice.
$100,000 was a lot of money, but a legacy was priceless. No, thank you, I said.
The lawyer's smile faltered. I don't think you understand. This is a one-time offer. Take it, or we will take this property through eminent domain. We have the full backing of the town council. We will get this land, one way or another. You can walk away with $100,000, or you can walk away with nothing. The threat was clear. They would crush me. The answer is no, I said again. I turned my back on him and slid the heavy garage door shut, the sound of it echoing like a gunshot. I had made my choice. I was staying. I was fighting. Later that afternoon, an old, dusty Volvo pulled up. A man who looked to be in his late 60s got out. He had kind eyes, a rumpled suit, and a warm smile. "Leo?" he asked. "I'm Alistair Finch." I had found my ally.
The next few months were a blur of legal strategy, depositions, and late nights in the shop, poring over my grandfather's work with Mr. Finch. The ledger was our Rosetta Stone. It contained dated entries and witnessed signatures that predated AeroCorp's patents by more than a year. It was the smoking gun. AeroCorp fought back, just as he'd said they would. They tried to paint my grandfather as a fraud. They tried to portray me as a greedy kid. They buried us in paperwork. But Mr. Finch was a bulldog, and I had something they didn't, the truth. And I wasn't alone. The town, which at first had been swayed by the developers' promises of jobs and revitalization, began to see the truth. The owner of the hardware store, a man named George, started stopping by with coffee. He told me stories about my grandfather, about his quiet generosity, how he'd fix equipment for local farmers for free. The woman who ran the diner started sending over food. They had respected my grandfather. They saw his fight in me. I was no longer an outsider. I was Vance and Son. The lawsuit never went to trial. 2 weeks before the court date, with the evidence from the ledger about to be made public, AeroCorp settled. The number was staggering. It wasn't about the money, but it was life-changing. More importantly, the terms of the settlement required them to publicly acknowledge Thomas Vance as the original inventor of the alloys. They had to restore his name, his integrity. I stood with Mr. Finch on the courthouse steps, the papers signed. It was over. "What will you do now, Leo?" he asked me. I looked back toward Oakhaven. I could go anywhere, do anything. But I knew where home was. "I'm going to reopen the shop," I said. It wasn't a quick or easy process. I used some of the settlement money to restore the building, to repair the roof, to buy new, modern equipment to stand alongside the old. But I kept the South Bend lathe by the north wall, right where it was. It was the heart of the shop. I enrolled in a community college program for machining and engineering. I had a lot to learn, but I had my grandfather's notes, I had his passion, and I had his name above the door. The shop is open now. It's not a big operation. It's just me, for now. I do specialized work, small batch fabrication for clients who value precision and quality. I'm building something that lasts. Sometimes, I stand in the middle of the shop floor late at night, the smell of hot metal and oil in the air, the hum of the machines a steady, reassuring song. I think about the day I arrived here, a scared kid with a cardboard box. That boy is gone. In his place is a man who knows the value of a promise, the weight of a legacy, and the meaning of home. This shop, this worthless pile of rust, it didn't just give me a future. It gave me back my past. It gave me a father I never knew I had. It gave me myself. My story isn't a fairy tale. The scars are still there. The grief from my parents is a quiet companion that will walk with me always. But it's no longer a crippling weight. It's a part of who I am.
and who I am is a man my mother and grandfather would be proud of. So I want to ask you, what is the inheritance that you carry? It might not be a building or a box of patents. It might be a lesson someone taught you, a promise you made, a quiet strength you didn't know you had until you were tested. Your real inheritance is the character you build when life tries to tear you down. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred something in your own heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. My goal is to share stories that matter, for people who have been through the fire and are looking for the light on the other side. And in the comments below, I'd love for you to share one thing you've inherited, not money or property.